You know everything that you're familiar with in your three-dimensional linear experience of space and time? Forget all of that immediately, because we're about to embark on a journey of multiverses, universes, and parallel timelines that's so all over the place that I can only hope we don't get Cronenberged in the process. That's right, people. I'm Jacob with Channel Frederator, and today we're taking a stroll through the timeline of Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland's Rick and Morty. Some of what you're about to hear is based on unconfirmed fan theories and our own educated musings. With all the mysteries and questions we still have with the end of Season 3 of Rick and Morty, giving this show the definitive timeline treatment is next to an impossible task. If you do have alternate theories on, say, which Morty is the original Morty, then go ahead and let us know in the comments. First, let's get one thing straight. Because this show has so many parallel universes and intersecting timelines, it's important to note that virtually every character in this show has some other parallel universe counterparts. Each reality in this series has its own Rick, its own version of Morty, Summer, Jerry, you get it. Just keep that in mind as we go through this timeline, which is really less of a line and more like a tree with lots of different branches that also got yarn bombed by someone who doesn't know how to knit. Also, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to be taking the Rick and Morty that the series begins with, and that Rick and Morty, the show, continues to mostly follow throughout our Rick and Morty, okay? Does that make sense? No? Great, we're off to a flying start. Okay, pause for deep breath as I curse all of the possible worlds that led me to untangle this insane timeline. Let's get this started. Beth is born around 1980. Let's begin where many fan theorists do, at the birth of Rick's daughter and Morty's mother, Beth. Rick and Morty isn't very clear on exact dates, but in a Season 2 episode where Rick drops Jerry off at Jerry Daycare, he dates the drop-off form 1/12/15, and Beth was 17 when Summer was born, and Summer is around 17 at the start of the series. And not much time passes between Season 1 and 2 of the show, besides 6 months of frozen time, but Beth isn't aging then, so we can surmise that Beth is around 34 or 35 during most of the series, which means that when she's born, it's around 1980. Beth's mother remains a bit of a mystery. Fan theories range from her being the teacher from the Magic School Bus, Miss Frizzle, to her being a blonde woman Rick is shown having sex with in a memory once who turns into a monster. The latter's been debunked, and the former is, confusing. The only real glimpse we get of Beth's mother isn't all that reliable. I hope you can hear the quotation marks around the word real there. It happens when our Rick is trapped in Galactic Federation prison and fabricates a memory for his captor. The false memory brings Rick back to the day he invented the portal gun, which he says is the day I lost her, presumably referring to Beth's mother. In the memory, she's shown to be a blonde, freckled woman named Diane. As she and Beth are about to join Rick in the car to get some ice cream, a portal appears above their heads, out from which drops an explosive device. Both Diane and Beth are killed. This tragic accident impels Rick to invent the portal gun. And then Rick tells the captor that this is a totally fabricated origin story. Well, good, I'm glad we got that covered then. The short of it is, Beth is born, but we're not sure who gives birth to her. Beth grows up in Fruppyland, and mostly without her father. 1980s to early 1990s. According to Rick, Beth is a scary kid because when she's growing up, she constantly asks Rick to make her terrifying toys like a sentient switchblade among many, many, many others. We don't otherwise know too much about the events of Beth's youth, but we do know that Rick creates an entire extremely safe world for her to play in called Fruppyland. In Fruppyland, nothing can hurt you. The ground is rubbery, the water is breathable, and the creatures are harmless. Beth plays in Fruppyland with her friend Tommy, who ends up disappearing in this magical land. Beth may have purposely pushed him into a honey pond and left him there, or he accidentally lost his way. Who can say? You decide what to believe. Besides Fruppyland, Beth's childhood takes place in Muskegon, Michigan. During this time, Rick is still mostly absent from Beth's life. Beth later says she only asked Rick to make her those scary toys just because she wanted his attention. So tragic. Rick disappears from Beth's life around 1994 to who even knows what the hell Rick's time frame is. Beth is mostly raised by her mysterious mother. Rick is often gone, something that, according to the show's co-creator Dan Harmon, Beth holds against her mom. Meanwhile, Beth continues to idolize her super genius dad. During this time, Rick does a ton of intergalactic traveling. He disappears completely from Beth's life 20 years before the series begins. This would put Beth around age 14. As the show goes on, we get glimpses into what Rick is doing during this time. Mostly, it seems like his rogue anti anti-establishment actions piss off a lot of beings from all over the galaxy. Rick and his friend Bird Person also likely spend a lot of time together. Pictures in Bird Person's current day house show younger versions of Rick and Bird Person playing in a band together and standing by what appears to be a rudimentary aircraft. Rick and Bird Person also fight in the Bird Wars together. Specifically, they battle at Blood Ridge on Gap Flap's third moon against the Grumflamites. The pair are rebels in the eyes of the Galactic Federation, and the war they fight in this period of Rick's life doesn't end here. To protect themselves from various governments trying to hunt them down, a large group of Ricks on the Central Finite Curve, whatever that means, form the Citadel of Ricks. Essentially, they create a government comprised of Ricks to protect themselves from other governments. Our Rick was never keen on the Citadel, seeing as he is the Rickest Rick of them all, and it's a very Rick thing to do to distance yourself from any kind of governing body, apparently even if it's yourself. The Citadel is said to be at least 15 years old, so it comes into existence before Morty, who is 14, is born. However, many Mortys inhabit the Citadel today. Beth and Jerry get pregnant at prom, around 1997. While Rick is off adventuring, his daughter Beth is living a normal teenage life. She meets Jerry Smith, who takes her on a date during their senior year of high school to the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra, performing the music of Alan Silvestri in the park. This is where Beth and Jerry have their first kiss. Beth and Jerry end up going to prom together. That night they have sex, and Beth gets pregnant with Summer. In Dimension C-137, and the dimension our Rick and Morty travel to mid-season 1, Beth considers getting an abortion, but ends up having the baby instead. Beth and Jerry don't get pregnant at prom, alternate 1997. But Beth doesn't give birth to Summer in every dimension. In Dimension C-500A, Beth gets the abortion after prom night and doesn't end up marrying Jerry. Thus, Summer is never born, neither is Morty, and Beth and Jerry go on to have their separate successful lives. Beth becomes a renowned surgeon operating on humans instead of horses, as she does in C-137, and Jerry becomes a famous actor starring in Cloud Atlas and Tom Hanks' role and doing cocaine with Johnny Depp. Both are lonely in their success, however, and end up eventually finding each other and reuniting in C-500A. Morty is born both with and without Rick, around 2000. Beth and Jerry have Morty 3 years after Summer is born. At this time, Rick is still out of the picture, and Morty grows up to be your regular, average Morty. But let's part ways with our Morty and slip into a different hypothetical timeline, shall we? Now, this is mostly conjecture, but I'm only getting into it because it stems from a very compelling fan theory that we covered on Cartoon Conspiracy once. You should go check it out. As I already mentioned, our Rick seems to have memories of a baby Morty, which doesn't make sense if he only entered Morty's life right around the beginning of Season 1, when Morty is 14. This could be cause to believe that our Rick actually comes from a different dimension, one where he was around for Morty's early childhood. In this timeline, the fan theory goes that our Rick grew up closely with his Morty and taught him everything. As a result, that Morty got to be super smart, approaching Rick genius level. For some reason or another, our Rick abandons this Morty, maybe because he realized he was becoming evil, maybe because the two geniuses were increasingly at odds. Either way, this abandoned Morty, who grows up to become evil Morty, we'll get to him more later, begins to plot ways to gain power over all Ricks. Or maybe he just wants his own original grandfather back, who knows. His actions later in the series could mean that neither or both of these scenarios are true. We know that our Rick has declared himself Rick C-137. If he's the Rick from the world of evil Morty, then there are two explanations. Either he started pretending to be C-137 once he entered that world, the one he inhabits at the beginning of the season, or he is indeed from C-137, and our Morty is not. Our Rick returns to Beth's life, he and Morty begin adventuring around 2014. Finally, the series begins in what's probably Dimension C-137. Yes, I know it might not be, but let's just stick with that for now. Rick, wasted of course, wakes Morty up in the middle of the night to take him on their first joint adventure of the show, which almost destroys the entire world. Luckily it doesn't, so that they can go on another adventure. Rick takes Morty out of school to help him retrieve a mega fruit seed, which has the power of making you super smart. Rick makes Morty hide the mega fruit seed way up inside his butthole to get past intergalactic customs, which they do, but not without leaving multiple aliens dead in their wake. When Rick and Morty return to Earth, Beth and Jerry are prepared to ban Morty from going on any further adventures with Rick, cause, you know, they want him to go to school instead. Then the Mega Seed, which is still in Morty's butt, kicks in, making him appear incredibly smart. Both Beth and Jerry reconsider the ban since Morty is clearly learning from his adventures with Rick, sort of. Rick excitedly rants about all the adventures he and Morty will go on once Beth and Jerry leave the room. Meanwhile, Morty is experiencing the after effects of the Mega Seed. He loses all intelligence and starts drooling and twitching on the garage floor, but whatever, the effects are temporary. probably. In the period that follows, things are about as normal for the Smith family as they can possibly be. Rick gives the family dog Snuffles human-level sentience, Rick and Morty visit a theme park that exists inside the body of a homeless man, aliens trap Rick and Morty, and accidentally Jerry inside a simulation so they can steal Rick's formula for concentrated dark matter, you know, the usual stuff. Morty also tries to lead an adventure with Rick where they end up going to a court for murdering giants, and Morty is almost sexually assaulted by a jelly bean. Meanwhile, Beth achieves self-actualization with a Meeseeks, and Jerry kind of improves his golf game, but not without some existential horror. You know how golf is. Rick and Morty destroy their version of reality, and I guess we're not doing dates anymore because at this point the series has started, so we're not going to be focusing on dates anymore. Until we will. Again, stay tuned. We know, or are at least pretty sure, that our Rick and Morty inhabit C-137 in episodes 1 through 6. Then, Rick makes a big mistake. He brews a love potion for Morty that's supposed to make Jessica, Morty's crush, fall in love with him. It doesn't go as planned. Okay, it does at first. Jessica falls for Morty, but then to make a longish story short, the potion makes everyone else in the world fall in love with Morty. And then it turns them all into Cronenbergs. Based on writer-filmmaker David Cronenberg's famous fleshy body horror monsters, the Cronenberg people of C-137 are frankly terrifying. Our Rick and Morty decide to abandon this world for what we'll simply call the New Dimension, where they live for more or less the remainder of the series. Meanwhile, the C-137 versions of their family, Beth, Jerry, and Summer, remain in the newly Cronenberg C-137, though they are not Cronenberg themselves. Rick and Morty move to a new dimension. Our Rick and Morty can't just leave C-137 and hop into some new dimension at random. That could really mess with the space-time continuum, as if Rick isn't haphazardly doing that every day, but I digress. They have to find a world where they can perfectly slot themselves into a place left empty by another Rick and Morty pair, not to mention a world that isn't Cronenberg. Rick is able to find exactly this. He brings Morty to a version of Earth where the resident Rick manages to rectify the whole Cronenberg situation. However, immediately after, that world's Rick accidentally kills himself and Morty in a small explosion, providing a perfect opening for a different Rick and Morty to take their places. So our Rick and Morty arrive from C-137 to this new dimension's version of Rick's garage where they find their own hideously damaged dead bodies. Rick and Morty proceed to bury those bodies in the Smiths' backyard. After a harrowing burial, harrowing for Morty at least, Rick and Morty are able to take the place of their dead counterparts in this alternative world, and it's heavily implied that Rick has done this several times before. Fun times had by all. A Cronenberg version of Rick and Morty moved to C-137. Meanwhile, back in the Cronenberg world, another Rick and Morty arrived. See, all along there had been another dimension, which we'll call the Cronenberg dimension, where everyone was born Cronenberg. The Rick and Morty in that dimension accidentally turned everyone there into regular humans. Mirroring the actions of the Rick and Morty who escaped the newly Cronenberg C-137, Cronenberg Rick and Morty escape their newly human planet to arrive in C-137, where they fit right in and have no other Ricks or Mortys to contend with. Life goes on for our Rick and Morty in this new dimension. Yep, things for Rick and company stay normal. Morty fathers the child of a sex robot, then Summer and Rick go on their first joint adventure to the sex robot's home planet, and Rick and Morty watch interdimensional cable for the first time. Summer also gets a job working at the Devil's Antique Shop, and he, being the devil, betrays her. Rick and Summer then spend months bulking up so they can beat the devil up, which they do. It's awesome, and DMX plays. It's just an A+ time. Evil Morty enters the picture. Our Rick and Morty are called to the Citadel because the Council of Ricks believe that our Rick, C-137, is behind the murder of multiple other Ricks. His portal gun is the proof. According to its record, it was at the exact timelines and places of the murdered Ricks when they were killed. To vindicate himself, our Rick escapes the Citadel with Morty to track down the killer Rick. They eventually find him inside a fortress guarded by countless Mortys, all strapped to the exterior. Ricks don't really have emotional attachments to their Mortys. Rather, they use their Mortys as shields. A Morty's lack of intelligence is able to disguise a Rick's genius. Rick calls this a camouflage. It's helpful for Ricks to keep Mortys around as human shields so that the many intergalactic creatures trying to chase down Ricks, and there are many, won't be able to detect them based on their uniquely genius brainwaves. Each Morty is hooked up to an apparatus that repeatedly stabs into both sides of his torso. The constant agony amplifies their ability to shield the presence of a Rick. Inside this gruesome fortress, our Rick and Morty find an evil Rick and Morty pair. Note that the evil Morty wears an eye patch. That's how you can tell that he's evil. Evil people wear eye patches. That's just the truth of the universe. While evil Rick tries to download our Rick's memories, our Morty gets locked into a room with all of the other captured Mortys. Our Morty successfully stages a Morty uprising, saving our Rick and resulting in the death of evil Rick. Our Rick and Morty report back to the Council of Ricks to say that they found the real Rick killer. All of the captured Mortys are then set free. Meanwhile, some Citadel Ricks inspect the dead evil Rick only to find that he's a robot operated by some remote technology. My god, I've seen this technology before, one of them says. Cut to evil Morty walking out of the fortress with all of the other Mortys. He removes his eye patch to reveal it was a gadget used to control evil Rick all along. He then disappears into the massive crowd of unassuming unassuming Mortys. Remember the theory we mentioned about our Rick possibly being evil Morty's original Rick? If that's true, then a comment from our Rick in this episode makes a whole lot of sense. He tells our Morty, a cocky Morty can lead to some problems. I'll explain when you're older. Perhaps the problem is what this evil Morty has become. Rick freezes time. Beth and Jerry go on a Titanic reenactment vacation because Titanic is Jerry's favorite movie. This leaves Rick and the kids to throw an intergalactic rager. Key characters from Rick's past like Squanchy and Birdperson attend the party. So does Summer's friend Tammy, who ends up hooking up with Birdperson. They leave the party together the next morning. Like any good party, it gets out of hand and the Smiths' house ends up trashed. As Beth and Jerry approach the house, angry about the apparent mess, Rick freezes time. He and the kids end up taking 6 months to repair the house and enjoy all of that frozen time. Of course, freezing time has its consequences. Once Rick unfreezes it, he, Morty, and Summer end up in a decaying dimension. They ultimately wind up shattering time into 64 different timelines before they can get back to their original one. They're also held hostage by the time police as a result. Now, do you see why doing a timeline of this show is so difficult? Speaking of difficult time mapping, let's get into ticket number 5126 and Mr. Poopy Butthole. This period begins in January of 2015. So this is where things start to get really fuzzy, but stay with me. Shortly after the party and the following extended cleanup, Rick and Morty leave their current Jerry at a Jerry daycare center called Jerry Bereaved. Jerry Bereaved, for those who don't remember, is where Ricks and Mortys can leave their Jerrys for safekeeping if the latter accidentally stows away on any intergalactic adventures. It even has a ball pit and a fake Beth. When Rick and Morty initially drop off Jerry in the episode, Rick labels his own dimension as C-137, but next to Jerry's dimension, he writes, not applicable. That Rick and Morty get a ticket labeled 5126. They then get on with their evening, playing arcade games, foiling assassination attempts, you know. The Rick and Morty from this episode eventually return to pick up their Jerry. They're given a Jerry who happily greets Morty and icily greets Rick, but then another Rick approaches them. He says, wait, do you have 5126? The Morty we've been following all episode pulls a ticket out of his pocket, only to discover that it's a ticket from the arcade they went to earlier in the episode. So these two Rick and Morty pairs just trade Jerrys. Ticket theory, as it's commonly called, is a popular one. First proposed on YouTube by the Save Point Guild, some believe it indicates that parts of Season 2 take place with an entirely different Rick and Morty pair than the one we're used to following. Plus, many believed that the universe switch caused by the ticket swap would be used as an easy way to get Rick out of prison at the start of Season 3, because it would mean that our Rick had never been to prison, or something like that. And that didn't end up being the source of Rick's jailbreak, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Even so, the theory extends to a subsequent event. A parasite invades the Smiths' home by impersonating the family's longtime friends, only they're not impersonating real friends, but rather implanting false memories of their shared histories with the Sanchez Smiths in the family members' minds. At the start of the episode, when the parasite arrives, Rick is seen discarding a bunch of glowing green rocks, and they look just like the ones Rick picked up at the end of the episode featuring Jerry Bereaved. We also learned that in this timeline, a character named Mr. Poopy Butthole has been a close friend of the Sanchez Smith family for a long time. Beth, however, begins to doubt that Mr. Poopy Butthole is a real friend and not a parasite, so she shoots him. Too bad, though, because he's super real. Mr. Poopy Butthole is severely injured, but don't worry, he'll be fine. Now consider this. Our Rick and Morty have never interacted with any Mr. Poopy Butthole at all, yet the Rick and Morty in this episode clearly have spent a lot of time with him. Mr. Poopy Butthole even appears in the intro of this episode, showing a reality in which he'd been along with Rick and Morty for all of their adventures. But that's the only episode intro he appears in. Maybe the Rick and Morty who fight the parasites and the Rick and Morty pair we see collect the glowing green rocks before picking Jerry up at Jerry Bereaved are the central characters in those two episodes, and those two episodes only. Or maybe we're thinking way too deeply about this. Not that that's anything new on this channel. Things change at Birdperson's wedding. Again, things more or less return to normal. Rick and Morty save the world with a performance of their smash hit Get Swifty. Rick takes Morty to the microverse he created to power his flying car battery. Rick turns into a tiny version of himself and joins Morty and Summer in high school, where he becomes insanely popular. Beth and Jerry go to alien couples therapy. Jerry almost sacrifices his penis for the famous civil rights activist Shrimply Pibbles, etc., etc. Then the whole Sanchez Smith family gets invited to a wedding. Rick's friend Birdperson is getting married to Summer's friend Tammy. Remember how they met at the party? At the wedding, though, Tammy's true colors are revealed. Turns out she'd been an agent of the Galactic Federation this whole time, implanted in the Smiths Children's High School to lead the Federation to Rick and his colleagues. 17 of the most wanted people in the galaxy are at Birdperson's wedding, including Rick. Birdperson is shot, but don't worry, he lives on as Phoenix Person, and Rick escapes with his family to a very small, uninhabited planet that looks kinda like Earth and supports carbon-based life forms. I don't know why they had to wait for that planet, though. I didn't see any problem with the Screaming Sun planet. Meanwhile, Mr. Poopy Butthole gets addicted to painkillers. Don't forget Mr. Poopy Butthole's storyline. After Beth shoots him, he starts taking painkillers and winds up attacking a pizza delivery guy. That's all on the Poopy Butthole front for now. We will keep you updated. Earth joins the Galactic Federation. Let's get back to the Sanchez Smiths, who are clearly unhappy with their new lives. Seeing his family's unhappiness, Rick does something very un-Rick. He decides to turn himself in so his family can go back to Earth. Rick gets imprisoned by the Federation, and the Smith family ends up on a very different sort of Earth than the one they'd left behind to attend Bird Person's wedding. Earth has joined the Federation, so the whole place is teeming with aliens and uses the Federation's currency. Jerry gets a job with the Federation where he brings in a 6 chewable figure income because he gets paid in edible pills, which seem to have replaced food entirely, though I'd just as easily believe that they just told Jerry that to get out of paying him. Summer is miserable and wants desperately to get Rick back to fix things. She has the bright idea of retrieving the portal gun that was buried with the dead body of their dimension's original Rick, which Morty told her about in a previous episode, Rick's D-Minutes. A Federation-controlled robot sees Summer and Morty with the portal gun and goes after them. The kids then use the portal gun to escape. Eventually, Summer and Morty wind up in C-137. In case you forgot, that's the world where this show started, the one that Rick Cronenberged in Season 1. There, Summer meets her C-137 self and her C-137 parents, the family that are Rick and Morty left behind. They're living off of Cronenberg flesh and clearly doing lots of exercise since they're all super jacked. Morty takes this time to express to Summer just how little Rick cares about them. After all, he did leave Summer C-137 in a totally messed up world. Our Morty and Summer end up getting captured by the Federation while they're still in C-137, but naturally, Rick ends up saving them, but not before breaking out of prison, taking the value of the Federation's currency, and more or less ensuring that Earth goes back to normal. Beth and Jerry decide to get divorced, and things get pretty dark, bruh. When Rick returns with the kids, Beth instantly sees him as a hero, and Jerry does not, to put it lightly. In fact, he makes Beth choose between himself and Rick, and yeah, guess who Beth picks? That's right, this is the beginning of the end of Beth and Jerry's marriage. Well, it's kind of been crumbling since day one, but this is where we first hear the D word, divorce. Beth and Jerry decide it's time to get one, thus ushering in a whole new era for the Smith children. Summer and Morty go through all of the typical phases of kids whose parents get divorced. They try to ignore it, they get angry, they blame themselves, they travel to a post-apocalyptic dimension where they're free to hunt mutant humans and murder challengers in the Blood Dome, just all standard stuff. As Summer and Morty process their emotions, Jerry moves out, and things get real when Beth, Summer, and Morty go to family therapy together, and Rick turns himself into a literal pickle to avoid it. This is the approved time for you to type "I'm Pickle Rick" in the comments. Once you're done, please return to your seat and keep your hands and feet inside the ride at all times. All the while, Morty is becoming more self-sufficient. He solves puzzles by himself when working with the Vindicators, a Rick and Morty take on the Marvel franchise, the Avengers, and he figures out how to restore Summer to her normal size when she accidentally turns herself into a giant after her boyfriend leaves her for a girl with bigger boobs. Finally, when Rick and Morty decide it's time to relax, they go to a special detox spa. The spa removes all of their toxic qualities, like Rick's over-the-top egomania and Morty's bumbling self-doubt. Morty essentially turns into Jordan Belfort from The Wolf of Wall Street, and it's Rick who has trouble persuading Morty to do the right thing for once. This means reuniting their toxic selves with their non-toxic selves, which they eventually do. The reign of evil Morty begins. In an episode that departs from our Rick and Morty almost entirely, things are going down at the Citadel. The place has become a bureaucratic societal nightmare. Ricks kill Ricks kill Mortys, same old story. No one seems to be satisfied with their quality of life. It's time for a change in power. Good thing it's election season. The candidates, multiple Ricks and a single suave Morty, face off in a debate that the Morty clearly wins. This takes place after candidate Morty fires his Morty campaign manager. As campaign manager Morty watches the debate on TV at a bar, a Rick wearing a trench coat approaches him. The Rick then hands campaign manager Morty a manila envelope full of secrets. In an unprecedented upset, candidate Morty wins the election at the Citadel, becoming the first Morty ever to rule the place. As many in the society rejoice at the change in power, candidate Morty then shows who he really is. He quickly gets rid of all of the Ricks who defy him in the Shadow Council, you know, the Ricks who actually control the Citadel. And by get rid of, I mean he murders them. Naturally, this leads to an ominous speech wherein President Morty swirls his drink and foreshadows his dictatorship. When campaign manager Morty attempts to reveal President Morty's true character, he's released into space, where he dies. With him goes the manila envelope full of secrets. It opens up showing pictures that reveal President Morty is actually evil Morty, and that he's likely still controlling some robot Ricks. And then whoops, we never see him again for the rest of the season. Beth and Jerry embrace the single life. Fortunately, our Rick and Morty and their families stay removed from the actions over at the Citadel, at least until season 4? Anyway, Beth and Jerry continue to lead separate lives. Jerry dates a 3-breasted alien who loves to hunt, and he tries to integrate her into his life with the kids, and then that ends up with the alien trying to hunt Summer and Morty, but that all gets resolved, so don't worry about it. Oh, and remember Fruppyland, Beth's childhood playground world? Well, her old friend Tommy is still in there. Beth and Rick go to retrieve him when she hears that Tommy's dad is about to be sentenced to death for his son's alleged murder. I mean, he did disappear very mysteriously at a young age. Turns out that Fruppyland has gone from a safe, friendly play place for children to probably the worst nightmare of all possible timelines. Seriously, of all the messed up things Rick and Morty has introduced us to, Fruppyland is probably the most depraved. You see, to survive all of his time in Fruppyland, Tommy procreated with the sweet, fruppy creatures and then ate his offspring, and it gets even worse, but that's all we need to get into right now. In trying to get Tommy out of Fruppyland to save his dad from a government-sanctioned execution, Beth realizes that she's just like her dad. She ruthlessly murders all of the deformed fruppy creatures and Tommy, bringing back only his finger to clone. The existence of the clone, though, ends up saving Tommy's dad's life. Speaking of clones, Rick makes Beth an interesting proposition. He can make a perfect Beth clone, he tells her, so that she can be free to wander the galaxy and have adventures like he did when she was young. Beth gives this some serious thought, but we're not sure what she decides. But just as the show says, it doesn't really matter what she picked, because whatever she does, it's still symbolic of her making a choice and having agency in her own life. That's an important lesson that's gonna come in handy again in, like, right now. The Smith family gets back together without Rick. By the end of season 3, Morty's been through enough adventures with Rick that he starts to really get it, or maybe he's just growing up like any teenager would. His self-esteem has increased, and so it seems has his intelligence. He even talks back to the President of the United States, who keeps calling Rick and Morty to help them solve alien problems, but won't take a moment to pose for a selfie with Morty. Rude. Keith David, I expected better of you and your golden voice. Rick certainly thinks it's rude. He gets on his high horse about the President taking a selfie with Morty, and a physical fight between the President of the United States and Rick Sanchez ensues, but Morty's over it. He steals Rick's portal gun and leaves the White House as Rick and the President continue to duke it out. At this point, Beth has no idea whether she's a clone of herself. After a phone call with Rick, she learns that if she were a clone that had become self-aware, Rick would have to kill her, so she goes into hiding from Rick, and the rest of the Smiths join her, including Morty. Beth and Jerry decide to get back together. Oh, what was that about having agency in the face of uncertainty? Morty calls Rick, who's still fighting with the President, to tell him that he stole his portal gun and that he and his family are in hiding. Rick, obviously deflated, ends his fight with the President and promises to leave him alone forever in exchange for the use of his highly inefficient portal. Rick uses the President's portal to arrive at the Smiths' hiding place. He comes with a gun, which he reveals is to kill Jerry, not Beth, who Rick insists is not a clone. Still, the family wants nothing to do with Rick. Not even Morty wants to adventure with him. Then Rick returns to the President, this time wearing one of Jerry's fly fishing outfits. He introduces himself to the President as Fly Fishing Rick, which the President immediately falls for. He says he'll give Fly Fishing Rick a call if he needs any help with alien matters. Back at the Smiths' house, the family settles down for a delicious dinner from Panda Express. When Rick enters to return Jerry's fly fishing attire, Beth tells him that he can't be rude to Jerry. She and Jerry and the kids are a family now, she says, and from here on out, things will be like season 1 again, except more streamlined this time. Based on this timeline, forgive me if I don't buy the streamlined part, Beth. Rick, singled out from the family, does not look too amused either. Mr. Poopy Butthole is now a proud dad. But wait, season 3 isn't over just yet. Mr. Poopy Butthole makes one last appearance to apologize for not being in the season. He was busy getting married and having a baby instead. Congratulations, Mr. Poopy Butthole. You won season 3. It's been a tough road and you deserve the best. That's all for now, until season 4 of Rick and Morty debuts in November of 2019. Since we don't have our own time crystals to jump right to that date, hang tight and watch our other Rick and Morty videos right here on channel Frederator. There are so many of them, so please go check them out. Once again, I've been Jacob, and remember, Frederator loves you. I just want you to know that I could have done one of those Rick belches on my sign-off, but I didn't. I just want you to know, though, that I thought about it.